Oh my gosh, we are so close to being done, y'all. Restriction on expectation damages, foreseeability, uncertainty, mitigation of damages. So key issues, how do we calculate what you're left with? In Krabby's, we talked about what was the value of the house. In Handicapped Children Education Board, we said what is the value of the new employee to the employer. And American Standard, we said what is the value of property without the grading. And we looked at what's the cost of completion versus diminution value. You should really do both in an exam because you're not the court. And so you could say like what you would hope for on either side. And you would say the court in Jacob and Young said this, but American Standard did this. So limitations on other losses. What limitations are there on other losses a plaintiff can attribute to the breach of contract? General damages flow directly from the breach of contract. Special damages are known and foreseeable consequences from the breach. So Hadley v. Baxendale, this is the crankshaft. General damages should be such as may fairly and reasonably be considered either arising naturally according to the usual course of things from such breach of contract itself or such as may reasonably be supposed to have been in the contemplation of both parties at the time they made the contract as the probable result of the breach of it. So reasonable and reasonable. Special damages. No. Goodness. If the special damages under which the contract was actually made were communicated by the plaintiff to the defendant and thus known to both parties, the damages resulting from the breach of such a contract, which they would reasonably contemplate, would be the amount of injury which would ordinarily flow from the breach of contract under these circumstances as known and communicated. But on the other hand, if these special circumstances were wholly known to the party breaking the contract, he, at the most, could only be supposed to have had in his contemplation the amount of injury which would arise generally and in the great multitude of cases not affected by any special circumstances, such as a breach of contract. Key points: foreseeable, certain, unavoidable. Foreseeable, certain, unavoidable. Foreseeable, certain, unavoidable. Foreseeable, certain, unavoidable. Recoverability of consequential damages depends on whether or not the damage was foreseeable at the time the party made the contract. No need to demonstrate that general damages are foreseeable. We assume they are because they flow directly from it. It is only necessary for the loss to be foreseeable, not the manner in which the loss occurred. The focus of foreseeability is on the breaching party. A loss is foreseeable if it is the probable result, not limited to necessary or inevitable losses. Statement 351, unforeseeable and related limitations on damages. Damages are not recoverable for loss that the party in breach did not have reason to foresee as a probable result of the breach when their contract was made. So the breaching party, it needs to be foreseeable to them. Loss may be foreseeable as a probable result of a breach because it follows from the breach in the ordinary course of events or as a result of special circumstances beyond the ordinary course of events that the party in breach had reason to know. Restatement 352, uncertainty as to limitations on damages. Damages are not recoverable for loss beyond an amount that the evidence permits to be established with reasonable certainty. Florifax, this is our flower call center. Lost profits are recoverable if the loss is within the contemplation of the parties at the time the contract was made, if the loss flows directly or approximately from the breach, if the loss can be said to have been caused by the breach, and if the loss is capable of reasonably accurate measurement or estimate. Holding. Court holds that you can collect for lost profits on collateral agreements under these circumstances. Restatement 350, avoidability as limitation on damage. Except as stated in subsection 2, damages are not recoverable for loss that the injured party could have avoided without undue risk, burden, or humiliation. Affirmative defense, party didn't mitigate. They didn't try. Illustration, a contract to lease a machine to B and to deliver it to B's factory. B repudiates the contract, but A nevertheless ships the machine to B, who refuses to receive it. A's damages for breach of contract do not include the cost of shipment of the machine. You can't keep adding damages when you've already know that that's not, they're not going to take it. Rockingham County versus Luton Bridge. So, I'm sorry. So this company won a contract to build a bridge, and then the city said, no, don't do it. We don't want the bridge. And they built it anyway, even though, like, literally the road connecting where the bridge was supposed to be wasn't built. So there was just a bridge in the middle of nowhere. The party, once put on notice of the breach, should cease performance. The non-breaching party cannot pile up the damages. Restatement 350, comment G, the aggrieved party is not expected to put himself in a position that will involve humiliation, including embarrassment, loss of honor, or respect. So here's the illustration. I think it's a little weird. But he calls this the meatloaf rule because it's, I would do anything to mitigate. So Warner Brothers Motion Picture Company contracts with Charlie Sheen, starred in a comedy for $100,000. No, $1 million. Warner Brothers breaks contract and engages Rob Lowe, a rival of Sheen, to star in the comedy, but offers Sheen an equally good role under an identical contract as the star of another comedy for $100,000. Because Charlie Sheen would be humiliated to work for Warner Brothers after Warner Brothers hired his rival to replace him, Sheen refuses to accept the offer. If rejection of the offer was reasonable in the circumstances, Sheen can recover the whole $1 million. So he didn't need to undergo humiliation to mitigate, which is why he'd get the full $1 million. Restatement 350, avoidability is limitation on damages. Except as stated in subsection 2, damages are not recoverable for a loss that the injured party could have avoided without undue risk, burden, or humiliation. The injured party is not precluded from recovery by the rules stated in subsection 1 to the extent that he has made reasonable but unsuccessful efforts to avoid loss. So maybe he didn't take that one, but was there another option that he did or did not take? Illustration of reasonable but unsuccessful efforts. On March 1st, Professor Helfand contracts with Ryan Researcher to do 30 hours of emergency legal research over spring break for $15 an hour. March 11th, Ryan informs Professor Helfand via email that he just received an invitation to attend a week-long VIP party at the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas. Ryan, therefore, has chosen to repudiate the contract. To find a replacement, Professor Helfand sends out an emergency email to all Pepperdine Law students. From the email, Professor Helfand is able to secure a research assistant for the week, but at the rate of $17 per hour. After spring break, Helfand sues Ryan for $60. He does this because it is $17 that he ended up paying minus the $15 he had originally decided to pay. That's $2. And then $2 times 30 is 60. Ryan responds that he had a friend at Loyola who could have done the research for $15 per hour. Professor Helfand may still collect $60 so long as his efforts were reasonable, even though he was unsuccessful in his attempt to fully mitigate. Manus was fired and didn't try to find a new specialized job. Also, he had a non-compete clause. 2 questions. Did Manus's conduct constitute cause justifying his termination? If not, did his failure to secure another job constitute a failure to mitigate damages? So the first holding, terminating Manus constituted breach of the employment contract, and there was insufficient cause to justify the termination. Manus had a 3-year employment contract with SKM. In Tennessee, there was an implied right of an employer to terminate an employee for cause, even if the agreement fails to explicitly provide so. What we said is the cause skulking and sitting at your desk might normally constitute cause. That being said, SKM prevented Manus from accomplishing his responsibilities, which constituted a breach of the covenant of good faith and fair dealing. A party cannot take steps to prevent the other party from performing in accordance with their agreement. Holding 2, SKM failed to satisfy its burden when Manus could have but did not mitigate his damages. The failure to mitigate damages is an affirmative defense. The employer must prove both availability of suitable comparable substitute employment and lack of reasonable diligence on the part of the employee. If no proof of comparable suitable substitute employment is presented to the trial court has no basis on which to determine the amount by which the plaintiff's damages should have been reduced. The existence of a contractual provision stating that Manus could find alternative commensurate employment or work does not change this outcome. First, this argument was not raised at the trial court, and the non-compete provision may not have been enforceable. So he did have a non-compete. Second, even if the trial court had been presented with this argument, consideration of the language in the non-compete provision would not have enabled the trial court to determine the amount by which Manus' damages should be reduced. Therefore, in the absence of evidence that suitable alternative employment was available, which is the moving party's burden, the defendant cannot rely on the affirmative defense of mitigation of damages. Consistent with the approach of the appellate court in Manus, many other courts have imposed on employer the burden of showing not only the employee failed to act reasonably in seeking other jobs, but also that there were comparable positions that could have been obtained. And then last, we have the loss of volume seller, and that is Jet Services v. Selena Properties, and this is the washing machines where Selena kicked them out, and the defendant cannot deduct additional contract from damages calculation, only mitigating contracts. So to establish its status as a lost volume seller, the plaintiff must provide that it possessed the capacity to make an additional sale, that it would have been profitable for it to make an additional sale, and it probably would have made an additional sale absent of the buyer's breach. So basically that it could have handled both. Note, you would still have to deduct costs, but most of those costs are fixed, so it wouldn't actually get into the calculation. But basically, it's not mitigating damages if you could have done it without. So even though the same washing machines were used, they had enough washing machines in the store that they didn't need to reuse those. Lost volume. Whether a subsequent transaction is a substitute for the broken contract sometimes raises difficult questions of fact. If the injured party could and would have entered into a subsequent contract, even if the contract had been broken and had benefited of both, he can be said to have lost volume. The subsequent transaction is not a substitute for the broken contract. The injured party's damages are then based on the net profit that he has lost as a result of the broken contract. Since entrepreneurs try to operate at optimum capacity, however, it is possible that an additional transaction would not have been profitable and that the injured party would not have chosen to expand his business by undertaking it had there not been a breach. It is sometimes assumed that he would have done so, but the question is one of fact and resolved according to the circumstances of each case. Illustration for services. A contracts to pave B's parking lot for $10,000. B repudiates the contract, and A subsequently makes a contract to pave a similar parking lot for $10,000. A's business could have expanded to do both jobs. Unless it is proved that he would not have undertaken both, A's damages are based on the net profit he would have made on the contract with B without regard to the subsequent transaction. And then the illustration of goods. A contracts to buy grain from B for $100,000, which would give B a net profit of $10,000. A breaks the contract by refusing to receive or pay for the grain. If B would have made the sale to A in addition to other sales, B's effort to make other sales do not affect his damages. B's damages for A's breach of contract include his $10,000 loss